fire,
All right, thank you. Okay,
not
there you go.
television.
Okay,
Let's try it again.
that's
All right.
okay. There you go.
Well, welcome. And this afternoon, we're going to explore the afterlife, visions of the afterlife, both ancient and modern. And I heard a very interesting story the other day about a theosophist who died and found themselves on the inner planes. And being fairly spiritually advanced, they were quite aware of their surroundings and the geography and the occupants of what one presumes is some part of the astral realm. So they wander around for an unspecified amount of time, familiarizing themselves with everything around them. And eventually they come to two signs. The one pointing this way says nirvana. The one lecture on nirvana. So which way does our theosophist go? I'll leave you to decide yourself. So there are three possibilities as to what happens to us when we die physically. Option one, absolutely nothing at all. That's it. We're gone, done, finished. Good night, Vienna. Option two, we make the transition to an afterlife of some kind where we remain indefinitely and possibly indeed forever. Or option three, that after death we move on to an intermediate afterlife where we remain until we're reborn in a new body at some point. There may, of course, be other options that I haven't thought of. So, do you believe in an afterlife of some kind? Or do you believe that when you die physically, that's the end of it and you just get switched off like an old TV and then thrown away? Are you one of the millions of people who think you get just one life on Earth, even if it only lasts for a few hours or days or weeks? Is it your view that when you've breathed your last breath, that's the end of it all, and all that awaits is the extinction of all consciousness and perception? If you do subscribe to the extinction option, isn't in fact lost. There's salvation even for die-hard materialists and those in utter denial of the spiritual realms, providing, of course, that you have sufficient wealth. If you've got a mere $200,000 to spare, did you know that you can buy yourself immortality? When you die, your body will be cryogenically frozen and preserved in sub-zero temperatures in a secret laboratory somewhere until such a time when medical science has advanced sufficiently by what disease it was that killed you in the first place. And then, according to the marketing literature, you can just carry on where you left off. Those on a budget with possibly only $80,000 to spare can opt to have just their brains indefinitely preserved at minus 200 degrees centigrade. Somewhere in the future, when technology permits, this can then be presumably transplanted into some suitable transhumanist-inspired vehicle so that you can just continue your bodily existence. For the materialist, this isn't only the ideal afterlife, it's the only afterlife. And this is because for those of a materialist conviction, death of the physical body is the end of the story. Death of the brain spells total obliteration of all consciousness and only oblivion awaits. This is a widely held belief, I have to say, and in my opinion, it's why many human beings behave as they do. Take what you can when you can get it, and to hell with the consequences. For the materialistically minded, life can only exist in physical form, and any other option is unthinkable. Perhaps you have a more open-minded view of the post-mortem experience, and you do believe in journeying to some kind of after-death realm. If you do, what do you think it might look like? How long might you stay here? For a while? Forever? Will it be pleasant? Will you commune with angels? Or will there be devils and demons or other satanic beings to torment you? Might you have to face some kind of judgment and punishment for all the bad things you got up to during your brief foray on Mother Earth? Will you have to account for your transgressions? Might you be rewarded? Will there be some kind of heaven? Will it look like this? This is what the three related Abrahamic religions of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism promise you. That simple binary option of heaven or hell, purgatory or paradise, possibly forever. Christianity talks very generally about a place called heaven. It's all extremely vague and often quite contradictory. Many Christians interpret this notion of heaven literally, cluttering it with cliched embellishments such as angels with harps perched on fluffy clouds, God on his throne surrounded by winged angels, and a haloed St. Peter vigilantly guarding those pearly gates to eternal bliss. And here you stay until some unspecified point in the far distant future when Judgment Day awaits. And what happens then isn't entirely clear. Some Christians believe the dead will be resurrected and will inhabit a new earth. There are many versions of precisely what might happen, depending on which of the many tens of thousands of Christian sects you happen to belong to. And yet none of it's very specific. Is that deliberate, I wonder? Nevertheless, hundreds of millions of people around the world are convinced by what I regard as rather infantile explanations. But of course, the heavenly option is only available for the worthy. The wicked and the sinful are faced with a much hotter option, miscellaneous fiery horrors in purgatory until their soul has been sufficiently purified and all evil has been exorcised. Should you fail on that score, then of course the only destination is hell, which, as all Christians know, is full of horned devils and terrifying demons, hoarding you into the fiery depths where sulphurous flames will engulf you and agonize you forever. So Christians have to behave yourselves, otherwise you know what's in store. Islam offers Jannah, which means paradise or garden. It's divided into various levels, the lower ones to punish the wicked and the higher ones to reward the righteous. For the pure, it offers many physical and divine pleasures, such as spectacular gardens. Among the many strands of Islam, there's no general agreement as to exactly winds up here. And Judaism offers a similar package, although curiously, there's no exact description of heaven anywhere in the Jewish scriptures. Many Jews regard heaven as Gan Eden, the famed Garden of Eden, a place of light and harmony where all races will sit together until the dawning of a new, peaceful messianic age. Jews who've led sinless lives are immediately detached to this place, or more likely, state of consciousness. Judaism also has the equivalent of purgatory, known as Sheol, a place of waiting for souls needing cleansing. And it has its counterpart of hell in the form of Gehinnom, a place of punishment and torment. Some Jews believe that those who've committed deeply sinful acts such as murder will remain here forever. So we can see common threads which exist in these three Abrahamic religions. None of them now believe in reincarnation, but it wasn't always that way. In its early days, Christianity did preach rebirth, but abandoned this for all kinds of reasons, eventually in the 6th century, although they'd been slowly abolishing this notion for a couple of centuries before that. In the Eastern religions, such as the various schools of Buddhism, along with Hinduism, their followers are comfortable with the idea that humans continue to experience the wheel of life by continually being reborn. This lies at the very heart of both venerable traditions, although there are beliefs that humans can be reborn as animals or members of the plant and vegetable kingdom. something that we as theosophists don't permit, since human beings have individualized souls and not group souls. Many people regard our ancestors' beliefs in the afterlife or rebirth as just primitive, weird, or somehow wacky, just the stuff of myth, legend, and make-believe. How could they believe in such nonsense? The skeptics smugly smirk to themselves. What these cynics fail to understand is that myths and legends and folklore aren't invented like some work of fiction. They're based on real events which become elaborated and embellished with symbolism and with allegory. Legends are heavily disguised truths. And so we have to ask, who are the real primitives here? Our ancestors or the modern tunnel vision skeptics with spiritual paralysis? We can learn a great deal from the cultures and spiritual beliefs of our forefathers. Most of them didn't view physical death as permanent annihilation, but the beginning of a new existence. And for many, this was seen as a journey into a mysterious new world, an adventure and a quest. Death and the afterlife were famously central to both the religious and societal beliefs of the ancient Egyptians. So much so, in fact, that life itself was organized around death. There was no belief in physical rebirth as such, but the Egyptians did firmly believe in an afterlife, journeying through the heavens with the sun god Ra, or deep in the underworld with Osiris. Central to their belief system was that a vital part of an individual remained near the body after death, and so the body had to be preserved. It also had to be sustained with food and drink, as well as being accompanied by furniture and games and weaponry even. Affluent Egyptians went to extraordinary and expensive lengths to ensure the soul of a family member would make a smooth transition into the afterlife. They mummified their dead in elaborate, lengthy and costly embalming procedures and produced ornate sarcophagi plastered with protective symbolic imagery. Personal possessions and mummified pets, especially cats, also accompanied them. The tombs and mausoleums were equally ornate and mirrored the design of a house. Some lavish edifices from the Second Dynasty even had their own toilets. Many, indeed most, were looted by tomb raiders down the centuries, although Tutankhamun's grave, which was opened a century ago, was crammed with expensive objets d'art. From around 2500 BC, the Egyptians regarded the soul as twofold. The first element was Ka, the body's spirit double, which shadowed and protected an individual. The second was Ba, which represented a person's individual essence. After death, Ka continued to survive in the tomb, but if the body were destroyed, neither Ka nor Ba would have anywhere to reside and would have to endure a second death. Before the journey into the afterlife was the fire judgment, and this was conducted in the Hall of Two Truths. The heart of the deceased was weighed against the feather of truth by the truth goddess, Mart, who was assisted by the jackal-headed god of the dead, Anubis. Everything had to balance on Mart's scales. If it were too light or too heavy, it would be consigned to oblivion after first being eaten by the evil demon Amit. Those passing the test were officially inducted into the afterlife by Osiris. Ba was represented as a human head combined with that of a bird. In its journey to the afterlife, it traveled to the kingdom of the dead, which was known as the Duat. For the purer-hearted, there was the higher realm of Aru, the field of reeds where they would enjoy eternity, accompanying Ra on his daily journey across the sky. This option was reserved only for those who were correctly dressed and who could recite the requisite incantations. And add to that, this world could only be accessed by passing through the gates guarded by malevolent spirit demons without looking at them. The Egyptian afterlife, like many others, was an idealized mirror image of the physical world with beautiful landscapes, abundant crops, and various deities with whom to commune. In the Egyptian mindset, social rank continued in this after-death realm, and the rich could take their wealth, power, and position along with them. The more elevated the life on earth, the more agreeable the afterlife. Royalty and rich merchants had their servants entombed with them, so they could continue their domestic duties in the hereafter. The afterlife of the Celts is known as the otherworld, and it's both colourful and very intriguing, although there are many different regional variations of this. For example, it was known as Anwin in the Welsh mythology. It was known as Avalon in the Arthurian legend, and Tir na Nog in the Irish tradition. Like the Egyptians, the Celts buried the dead with grave goods, which they would need in the afterlife. For example, a warrior would be buried with his helmet and with his sword. Others would be accompanied by food or ornaments. As to the location of the otherworld, the Irish Celts imagine the afterlife as being underground or else on islands somewhere in the sea. Here there was no age, sickness, death, or unhappiness. There was an everlasting supernatural paradise occupied by deities and was characterized by youth, beauty, health, abundance, and joy. This realm is also visited by mythical heroes, either by chance or sometimes by being invited by one of its occupants. It was accessed via caves, via burial mounds or waterfalls, or indeed from under the water itself. And sometimes these heroes found themselves in this place spontaneously, accompanied by a magical mist, as well as strange animals and supernatural beings. At other times, a beautiful otherworldly woman would entice the hero with a silver apple branch or a ball of thread to follow. In Ireland, this voyage to the otherworld was said to be undertaken sometimes in a glass boat, on a chariot, or on the back of a white horse. In Irish and other tales, the hero sometimes returns to the physical realms after he imagines what is only a short time away. But he discovers, to his horror, that hundreds of years have elapsed and all his companions are now dead. The Druids, the Celts' priestly sect, but also medical advisors, believed that there were three circles of life and the soul lived successively in each of these spheres. And during this time, it reincarnated in all conceivable forms of matter and spirit before entering a nirvana-like state, a heaven-like state, and finally departing from the cycle of material existence. The Druids were so certain of rebirth that they wept with regret at the birth of a child, but rejoiced heartily at death. They also believed that debts not paid in this life could be held over until the next incarnation. I suppose we must regard this as some kind of financial karma. Beliefs about death and the afterlife among the many hundreds of Native American groups varied enormously between tribes and even within tribes themselves. And so did the burial rites and the funeral practices. There was no organized or central belief system. However, most of these tribes entertained the notion that the dead departed for an afterlife, and so funeral rites to negotiate all the hardships of that journey. Most tribes believed that the souls of the dead departed for a spirit world and became part of the forces which influenced every aspect of their lives. The Sioux, for example, believed that the soul departs to a spiritual realm closely resembling their homeland on the Great Plains of North America, which they named as the Happy Hunting Grounds. Here life was easy and animals could be hunted without any difficulty at all. The Hopi tribe of Arizona viewed the departure of the dead as a journey westwards through the sky, and the more righteous found the journey easier than those who had sinned during their life. A number of tribes believed in the existence of two souls, one that died when the body died, and one that might wander the after-death realms, but which eventually also died. Like other cultures, the Vikings used burning boats to dispatch their dead, mirroring the journey that they would take in the afterlife. After death, Viking warriors famously departed for the Hall of the Slain, which is better known as Valhalla, the Norse god Odin's vast feasting hall. Constructed from shields and from spears, this gigantic afterlife edifice was big enough to accommodate hundreds of warriors. And among its 800 doors was a wooden one known as Valgrint, the point of entry for worthy heroes. Once in Valhalla, their war wounds healed, Viking warriors could resume the same pleasures that they'd enjoyed on Earth, principally fighting and feasting. Each day they would clad themselves in armor and go to a special practice area to engage in combat. Should they be mortally injured, they'd be restored back to life, but still obliged to suffer the pain of their wounds. But not to worry, by evening time everything was back to normal, and they would return to Valhalla's feasting hall to gorge themselves on a giant wild boar, which was killed, eaten, and reincarnated each day. The Norse, I have to say, certainly weren't known for their vegetarianism. So attractive was this Norse afterlife that certain veteran fighters, not killed in battle, would deliberately fall on their own swords to ensure a safe passage to this hall of hedonism and heroes. The Aboriginal peoples of Australia, consisting of many hundreds of different groups, have always had a universal belief in reincarnation via an eternal cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. It's their view that the souls of the deceased travel to the land of the dead, which they believe is located in the sky. But again, providing that the correct rituals were conducted during their lives and also, crucially, at the time of their deaths. As always, there are many different regional variations across this vast continent. Central and northern Aboriginal tribes believed that souls awaiting rebirth occupied different parts of the landscape, such as a solitary tree or a pool of water. This realm was known as Angia. The dead lingered in these locations until they could occupy the womb of a passing woman. Each child then was regarded as having originated from a rock, or from a tree, or from an outcrop. Curiously, this offered women a means of contraception. Young women, not wishing to get pregnant, simply disguised themselves as old women and attempted to look as unattractive as possible. The Aboriginal link with the afterlife in the sky was known as the Rainbow Serpent, and this represented the road along which spirits would pass before occupying women's bodies for rebirth. Aboriginal peoples view death as an inevitable part of an eternal cycle, but only in the old and the very young. They regard the deaths of healthy men and women as acts of black magic conducted by their enemies and acts which have to be avenged. So various types of sorcery pervade Aboriginal life, and a common form of retribution for the dead man's family was to secretly perform revenge magic on the murderer or on his family. In Northern Australia, especially, the funeral ceremonies there can be very prolonged and last for years after the burial itself. Tribes say that these colourful dramas, special dances and songs to send the dead on their way, originated in creation times and mirror the ceremony carried out for the first death at that time. These events also celebrate the connection of the living with plants and animals, and they re-establish the unity of humans with the natural world after the disruption of death. Sometimes bodies were kept for months before being placed in a hollowed out log and left to decompose. In the Near East, the netherworld of the early Mesopotamians, the Assyrians and the Babylonians, were all marked by fear. Souls were menaced by demons and evil spirits. Later, they evolved the idea of two forms of afterlife. First, there was Dilmun, a paradise reserved solely for the gods themselves. Then there was Urkala, the destination for humans. But Urkala was certainly no paradise. In fact, it was quite the opposite, a bleak shadow realm devoid of satisfaction or pleasure, and from which there was no return. In later Babylonian legend, physical death was regarded as the final chapter of existence. But the Sumerians held that if someone hadn't been correctly honored at their funeral, they were destined to return to heap suffering on the living. The souls of suicides, criminals, and victims of violent death were thought to be especially vengeful. Before the emergence of Zoroastrianism, ancient Persians referred to hell as Duzak, a demon-infested pit ruled by the wrathful god Angra Mainyu. The evil spirits which wound up there could expect unceasing savagery. Some escaped back to Earth to torment humans. Duzak was characterized by extreme weather and temperatures with constantly erupting volcanoes, spewing out molten lava and sandstorms. And if that weren't unattractive enough, there were also slave pits for souls stolen by the archdemon Vizaresh. Those who resisted were still consumed by Angra Mainyu. So Zoroaster, who's said to have operated between the 11th and the 7th centuries BC, is regarded as the founder member of the Persian alchemists and astrologers known as the Magi. He formulated a dualistic setup with the supreme god Ahura Mazda on one side, opposed by Ahriman, the destroyer, on the other. And Zoroaster taught that the after-death experience was entirely dependent on an individual's conduct during earthly life. He asserted that human beings have souls which precede birth and survive physical death. Zoroastrianism, known as the fire religion, remains an influential but minority faith still today. Believers say that after death, the soul remains in prayer with its physical vehicle for 3 days. The following day, a woman appears. Representing the soul's life on earth, she takes the form of a very ugly old hag for the sinful, while the righteous perceive her as a beautiful maiden. And she conveys the soul to the Chinvat bridge. The sinless experience an easy passage across this wide bridge with rewards and comforts waiting on the other side. If the soul continues in its good behavior and can purge itself of malign elements, it can eventually expect to achieve godlike status and live in infinite bliss. As usual, it's a very different outcome for the sinful. For them, the bridge is knife blade thin, and they're confronted by wizened old demons who consign them to a terrifying hell, where their earthly wickedness is rewarded by a systematic ravaging by monsters, along with all the other usual torments, terrors, and punishments. So we can detect a common thread running through many of these traditions. The message from quite a few is behave yourself or you're in for a hell of a time. And some of these spiritual traditions echo the timeless truths contained in the ageless wisdom teachings, albeit often in distorted or very embellished form. And as we know, these teachings form the cornerstone of modern theosophy. Since its re-emergence a century and a half ago, it's put huge emphasis on the after-death states, non-physical realms, reincarnation, and that all-important law of cause and effect. Much of this information is contained in my new film, The Myth of Death, which was premiered by the European School and supported by the Blavatsky Trust. To conclude, what I would say is that the theosophical explanation of the life, death, rebirth cycle is the most logical and persuasive account I've ever come across, and it resonates with me on a deep intuitive level. I just know it to be true. And I have to tell you that I'm a somewhat cynical old hack who's been practicing the dark arts of journalism for well over half a century. By the way, not that many journalists are theosophists. So if it can convince me, well, who knows? So to end on an upbeat note, many of our ancestors' views of the afterlife may have been grim and even diabolical, but so are the views of many of our contemporaries. Nevertheless, if you do believe in an afterlife and in rebirth as part of an endless process of evolution, as I do and many of you do, then what follows physical death is to be welcomed and not feared. It's not as if we have a choice, is it? And the theosophical teachings provide us with insights into the geography, the clientele, and the makeup of these post-mortem realms. Knowing something about where you're going is always a good idea when you're embarking on a new journey. Thank you and goodbye.